Okay, we've got an environmental crisis. We've massively overshot the physical limits to growth of the economy. That means that we face problems like global warming, peak oil, mass extinctions, soil erosion, groundwater depletion. The list goes on and on. We've overshot the limits to growth, and that means that we need a smaller economy. What would this smaller economy look like? Well, it would mean that we would substantially reduce personal consumption, we would substantially reduce human population, and we would drastically reduce or completely eliminate livestock agriculture. That's what a smaller economy would look like. In other words, we don't want economic growth, we want economic degrowth to a smaller economy. Now, how do we get to this smaller economy? Well, there are approximately 1 zillion things that we need to do. And this is really the kind of subject that would really be more appropriate for an entire semester of a college level course rather than a 10 to 15 minute video. So I'm just going to give you the broad overview here. And these fall roughly into cultural changes and political changes. For now, we want to talk about the cultural changes, and really the cultural changes that we need at this point are essential, are required in order to get to the political changes. Because if we don't have some basic support for the idea of degrowth, we're not going to get any political support for this as well. So we need cultural support in order to get the political support. And the first important cultural fact that we have to understand about the United States today is that there is approximately zero consciousness of limits to growth among the general population. There's almost no one who's even really aware of the huge impact that humans have on the planet. You've probably heard of the term the anthropocene, which means the geological epoch in which humans were the dominant force on the face of the earth. We are now smack in the anthropocene, and most people are not even aware that this is even a problem, or that we've really so substantially changed literally the face of the earth since the beginning of agriculture. In case there's any real doubt about the Anthropocene or about the need for limits to growth, I'm just going to cite this one study which came out recently in October of 2020, and it's titled Global Human-Made Mass Exceeds All Living Biomass. I thought I'd repeat that here. Global human-made mass exceeds all living biomass. This means that the total physical amount, the total mass of everything our economy puts out, all the buildings, all the cars, all the roads, all the plastic, the total mass of all the products of the economy is now greater than the mass of all living things on the planet. This clearly shows, in my view, that we've gone into the Anthropocene. What's really disturbing about this report, though, is when you read the details, because it's not just because we've put out more and more and more stuff. It's also because we've destroyed about half of all life on Earth. The total biomass of all plants, and plants are the biggest contributor to the total biomass of living things on the planet, the total mass of all plants has been cut in half since the beginning of agriculture. So it's not just because we're producing more stuff, it's also because we've dramatically decreased the total amount of biomass on the planet. So is anyone actually aware of this? Do you see this being discussed in political circles anywhere? I probably don't have to tell you how totally out in left field any political awareness of the problem of degrowth or the problem of the Anthropocene is in contemporary political discussions. We're not even talking about degrowth. Everybody loves economic growth. Democrats like economic growth because it means more jobs. Republicans like economic growth because it means more profits. Politicians like economic growth because it makes everybody happy. Even proponents of the Green New Deal like economic growth. We're going to need a lot of jobs in order to build out all of these wind turbines and all of these solar panels. So the Green New Deal isn't going to be bad for the economy. It's actually going to help the economy to grow. So everybody loves economic growth. So what we need is cultural change in order to make proposals for degrowth plausible. Now, what exactly does cultural change in this context look like? Well, it would mean that we would prefer, for example, bicycles to cars. We would prefer plant foods to animal foods. We would be interested in things like car sharing and co-housing. We'd probably be into backyard gardening and food co-ops. And we'd be into smaller families. These are the kind of cultural changes that we would need in order to create the background of popular support for concrete political proposals to bring about degrowth. This is sometimes referred to as simple living. Several decades ago, there was quite a bit of interest in the subject of simple living, and there were quite a few books that were written on this subject, and there was quite a bit of interest stirred up about it. One of the most prominent of these books was this book, Your Money or Your Life, by Joe Dominguez and Vicki Robin. What these authors advocated was essentially simple living from a practical point of view. They advocated simple living in the sense of live frugally, save up your money, and then retire. And when that happens, then you can lead the kind of life doing the kinds of things that you want to do rather than the kinds of things that you have to do because you need a job. Dwayne Elgin wrote a popular book on voluntary simplicity, and other books were written as well. Kate Lawrence wrote The Practical Peacemaker, which advocated simple living from a vegan perspective. There's one ambiguity here. What does simple living actually mean? If we mean by simple living making your life less complicated, that may actually be in conflict with the goal of reducing your resource consumption. Sometimes reducing your resource consumption actually makes your life more complicated. It's only if we define simple living to mean reducing your resource consumption that it has relevance for us. People may actually have to go to extra effort in order to avoid buying new products and buying used instead, or to avoid excess packaging and so forth. Well, how did advocating simple living work as a strategy? All of these books did have an influence and continue to have an influence. But overall, so far, they haven't had that much impact on the consumer economy or in terms of reducing resource consumption. There's two problems with this general approach to simple living. The first is that we don't want simple living just as a strategy for personal enlightenment. We want simple living on a massive scale. The second is that our economy is in conflict with the goal of simple living. Our national infrastructure assumes that people are consumers and want to be consumers. What this means is that we have an infrastructure problem in the United States. Because of our infrastructure, it's very easy to live a consumptive lifestyle. And it's very difficult, or it's a hassle, to live simply. For example, you can ride your bicycle to go to places, but there are problems with riding the bicycle. You're at the mercy of the weather, there aren't that many bike paths, and you're taking your life into your hands if you go out into traffic on a bicycle. An accident which would be a fender bender for a car driver could be fatal for a bicyclist. So you have to be cautious. You can do it, but it's something of a hassle. The same kinds of problems apply to taking the bus. You can take mass transit, But then you have to figure out the bus schedules. The bus routes are not always going to be that convenient because mass transit isn't that well supported in the United States. You're still going to be exposed to the weather if you have to wait at the bus stop for a while or if you have to transfer. And in the end, you may wind up actually paying more for your trip than you would if you had just gotten in a car and driven to your destination. So you can do it, but it's a hassle. Simple living is complicated. The one possible exception to this is going vegan. We already have all of the physical infrastructure that's needed for a vegan diet. It's already here. Now, it's true that people sometimes have difficulty going vegan, but that's because they don't know exactly what to do. They don't understand what exactly they're supposed to eat. It's a very new diet for them, or they face social pressure from their family and friends. But from a physical infrastructure point of view, we've already got all the infrastructure we need for a vegan diet. The additional problem is that for all this effort, you won't necessarily reduce your carbon footprint by that much. In 2008, there was some research done on the carbon footprint of various lifestyles in the United States. And they looked at a variety of different lifestyles, all the way from investment banker to the homeless. And what they found was somewhat disturbing. First of all, as you might expect, the carbon dioxide footprint of people in the United States is quite a bit more than the world average. It's about 20 metric tons of CO2 in the United States as compared to 4 metric tons per person per year elsewhere. But what was interesting was they also did research on the lifestyle of the homeless, and they found that even the homeless person had more than the world average. The homeless person had about 8.5 metric tons of CO2 each year. The somewhat disquieting bottom line is that in the United States, even people with the lowest energy usage account for, on average, more than double the global per capita carbon emission. So that's the problem. We have an infrastructure problem in the United States. Until we change this infrastructure, our simple living lifestyle can't actually address the problem fully, even if we're willing to go to all that trouble, even if we're willing to become homeless or a Buddhist monk. So we see that because of infrastructure problems, there's a certain level below which we cannot really fall. If you're living in the United States, almost by definition, you're consuming in an unsustainable way. So simple living is necessary, and cultural support for simple living is necessary because that's ultimately where we want to go. But it's not sufficient by itself. In order to get to this simple living on a massive scale, which is where we ultimately want to go, we have to have basic infrastructure changes to the United States. And that means we need political changes.